Hello and thank you for watching this video, or well, you're about to watch this video, but anyways. In today's video, what I'm going to talk about are some comic books that are great for beginners. This actually was an inspiration or suggestion from my good friend Tim Lucas, who recommended for me to do a video like this. The reason being is when he got back into comic books, he didn't really know where to start, and he made a comment that for a lot of people who've never read a comic book before, it's pretty intimidating with the amount of material that's out there. There's, literally 80 years of comic books, and there's, millions of issues to look through. So as for a beginner, it's probably very intimidating to kind of figure out where to start if you've never read a comic book and what you should start with. So in today's video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a few comic books that I think are really great kind of beginner comic books for someone who's never read a comic book to start with. And they're easy to read. They're stories that don't have a lot of continuity and things like that. So and all the comic books I'm going to recommend you can get through Amazon, or most importantly, you should be able to find at your local comic book shop. All right, so let's get into it. So here are the comic books that I'm going to talk about here. So the first one, back up here, is Superman Earth 1. So this is from DC Comics Earth 1 series of comic books. Each of these comics comes just the way you're seeing it here. There's no single issues that have been collected into this edition. These comics were created with the sole purpose of being actual graphic novels that are complete stories, the way you see it right here. So why do I think this is a good comic for beginners? So first of all, this is from DC Comics Earth 1 series, which means there's no prior continuity. So this is all brand new stories featuring characters you're familiar with. They all start with their origin and tell one and done stories, meaning there's an entire story in this comic you're looking at. The other reason I think it's a really good comic to start with is because the writer J. Michael Straczynski and the artist Shane Davis have just created a really awesome story. This story retells Superman's origin, and it's been told a dozen times or so or more. And as you can see, the artwork is really nice and it's really clean. It's not very abstract. Some comic book artists are artists. So some of the art you see can be a little bit abstract, might not be for everyone, but I think one of Shane Davis's art is very user-friendly. It's beautiful artwork, it's very clean, it's very modern. The other thing I really like about this comic, and I think is great for beginners, is the panel layout. So what I mean by that is if you look at these panels and the layout, there's not a lot of dialogue on these pages. So it's very easy to follow. You're not kind of trying to read everything and figure out where the story is going. It's laid out very nicely, very clean. It's really easy to follow. The other reason I think this is a great story to read is about my favorite character, Superman, here. So it's a great modern retelling of his origin. And again, it's just a really great comic book. So that is Superman Earth 1 by J. Michael Straczynski and Shane Davis. You should be able to find this on Amazon and at your local comic book stores. All right, so that's the first one. I'm going to put this back on the shelf and grab the next one. So this comic is an older comic. This is Marvel's, and this came out in the 90s, I believe. Yeah, in the 90s. And this is by Alex Ross and Kurt Busiek. The reason why I think this is a great comic book to start with is because it's not a traditional comic book. Well, it is and it isn't. So first of all, it's fully painted. Alex Ross is like the Norman Rockwell of comic book artists. So if you look at his art, it's iconic, it's classic. He loves the 60s and 70s and the 80s. So that's where this all has influenced from. And this is basically the history of the Marvel Universe told through the eyes of a photographer. So it's not told through the eyes of a comic book hero, it's told through the eyes of a photographer. So it's very relatable. He's kind of plays our role in the story. He's witnessing all these great events in the Marvel history. So it's a really awesome comic. This has been around for a while. You can definitely pick this up. It's been reprinted a bunch of times. And I think it's just a great place to start because it's easy to follow. There's a lot of characters you're familiar with and a lot of cool history. And it's just a beautifully drawn and written comic book. All right, let's move on to the next one, shall we? So the next one here, another Marvel one. See, people always say I'm just a DC guy, but look how many Marvel comics I'm recommending. Anyways, this is The Ultimates This is by Mark Millar and Bryan Hitch. So this came out early 2000, I think around 2002 perhaps. This is a reimagining of the Avengers. So again, another comic book that doesn't have a lot of continuity. When you're reading this, you're reading it like everyone else for the first time without a lot of baggage. So the nice thing about this comic is the artwork is amazing and it's amazingly detailed, but it's also very realistic. Bryan Hitch, the way he draws comics is a very realistic manner. Now, if you notice, that's Nick Fury, and he looks like Samuel L. Jackson. So a little bit of history for you. Before Samuel L. Jackson played Nick Fury in the Marvel Comics, this is the first time he actually ever appeared in a comic book like this. Prior to this, Nick Fury was a white guy, an older white guy, who David Hasselhoff played in a ill-fated TV show, which I enjoyed, but didn't really go anywhere. But anyways, so this is where they got the inspiration to make Samuel L. Jackson Nick Fury, is because Bryan Hitch, the artist, used Nick Fury as his model when he did this comic book. So this comic book is great because the art's amazing, the story is amazing, it's a modern retelling of the Avengers story told with today's sensibilities, and it's just a beautifully done comic book, and it's really easy to follow, it's very modern, it's a great comic book. Alright, so let's move on to the next one. The next one we have here, this is again by Mark Millar, the guy who wrote Ultimates. This is called Nemesis. Now Nemesis is a 4-issue miniseries from Mark Millar, and I forgot the name of his, Millar World Publications. So this is his own character he created. So this is not based on a previous character or anything like that. Nemesis is his own creation. What I love about this comic book is it has zero continuity because it's a brand new character. It's really original, and it really kind of plays around with the traditional superhero trappings. I will say though, this is definitely for mature readers. It has some really graphic stuff and some graphic storytelling, so it's definitely not for kids, but this is definitely great for an adult who has a little bit maybe more of a twisted sense of humor. And the best way to describe it is if you like Silence of the Lambs, you'll probably really dig this comic. It's got some really dark stuff in it, but it's highly entertaining. It's really well done. Probably not as dark as Silence of the Lamb, but it's pretty dark. I mean, if you look at this stuff, there's definitely some stuff in here. But the art by McNiven is amazing. So it's a beautiful comic, easy to read. It's really short. It's just 4 issues, and this is the collected edition. And you can get this on Amazon, at your comic book store, or on Comixology, any of those ones. All right. So the last one I'm going to show you is this Batman comic. Now, when you go to the comic book store to look for this comic, don't look for this. This is really old. This is from like the 80s or so. But the comic store you're going to look for is called Batman Year One. And this is available. It's been reprinted. And this is a retelling of Batman's origin. Now, the reason why this is a great comic book to read is because the artwork is very gritty, yet very easy to follow. And the story by Frank Miller is phenomenal. This is just a very simple superhero story. It's really not a superhero story, because when you read it, you kind of will understand the basis of like Batman Begins and some of the more modern interpretations of Batman. It's just very much a man, on his own in the streets of Gotham. Really no superheroics. This is very low tech. He doesn't really have any technology in this one. Just really his costume, and it's a really great comic. So what you're going to look for is Batman Year One. It won't look like this because this is a collected edition with a bunch of other comic books, but the one you're going to ask for is Batman Year One by Frank Miller. You can find that on Amazon, comic book stores, Comixology, anywhere. Okay? So those are the comics I'm going to recommend. One last thing I want to show you, though, is taking a look at the Comixology app, and I'm looking at this on my iPad Pro. So this is Comixology on my iPad Pro. And this is a great way to get started with comic books also. If you don't want to invest time in ordering a comic book from Amazon or going to a comic book store, or you just want to, do something right now, you can find all these comic books I recommended on here. Now, the nice thing about reading a comic book through this app, or through the Comixology app, well, if it worked, there we go, is that it kind of shows you how to read it. So if you go through it and you swipe, it shows you exactly what to read. So as you can see, this new Batman comic is showing you exactly how to read it. So it's really easy to follow. So I highly recommend looking at it this way. I read comic books in all the formats. I buy trade paperbacks, I buy single issues, and I buy a lot of comics through my iPad just to save some amount of space. So that's it for this video. So hopefully you learned something about comic books, from DC Comics to Marvel Comics to Image Comics. There's definitely something for everyone. And if all else fails, just take something off the shelf. If you look behind me, you see all these great comic books. If you see something like you pull this off and you're like, oh wow, this looks really cool, just buy it. Who cares? Just read it and just take a risk with it. I think my first comic book was some random Superman comic that was in the middle of a really complicated story that I really didn't understand, but it really got me hooked. So you don't have to follow any of my advice. If you just want to go shop by the cover, that's great as well. Again, thanks for watching this video. If you like what you saw, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and have a great day.